In today's video, I'll reveal why spending $10,000 a month in retirement is a dangerous trap that could actually wreck your financial future. Through working with hundreds of retirement clients, it's shown me that blindly chasing a round number, like $10,000 a month, often forces most people to either deplete their savings too quickly or develop consumption habits that their portfolios simply can't sustain. That's exactly why I'm making this video, to expose the arbitrary spending target myth, show you the financial and psychological damage that it causes, and give you a better framework for determining what you actually will need to spend in retirement. Let's get right on into it. First, we need to understand what's behind this $10,000 a month fixation in the first place. It often arises from a mix of psychology and marketing. Round numbers are easier to grasp and easier to market. But most people don't realize it has no real link to your individual budget or your cost of living differences, amongst others. In fact, financial media and financial advisors often throw these figures around for simplicity, and they're not always accurate. The result? Retirees blindly chase a headline number rather than a personalized spending plan. So why does this matter? Because when you target a specific number, like $10,000 a month, you often end up withdrawing too much too early. And that can push your withdrawal rate above sustainable levels. And for many retirees, here's how that plays out. People set budgets based on this round number and not their real expenses. And even worse, if market returns fall short, they still withdraw the full $10,000 amount, sometimes even more, just to keep up. And advisors who reinforce that advice through yearly plans, they cement that mindset that any drop in withdrawal means failure rather than flexibility. And that is just plain wrong. Financially, it often means early depletion or higher risk of running out of money. And that leaves retirees with more anxiety when they can't sustain that target that they've set out to achieve. And emotionally, people can feel like they're failing, even if they still have what's considered enough. I've even had clients tell me, I thought $2 million was safe, but at $10,000, I feel like I'm falling short. That's a powerful wake-up call. The $10,000 a month spending fixation is harmful enough, but the lifestyle inflation that it triggers creates even more financial damage if not planned for correctly. So what actually happens when you peg spending to a high number? Lifestyle inflation kicks in almost instantly. Suddenly, the budget isn't optional lifestyle. It becomes a lifestyle benchmark. In the beginning, it feels great. You upgrade the car, the travel, the dining, and before you know it, you're budgeting every month at that full amount. And that's just in time for those other one-time expenses to put you over the edge. Here's why that matters so much, especially in early retirement. Once you adjust to that level of spending, it's hard to dial back. You start believing that all that spending is essential, and dialing back feels like failure. Even worse, many people can feel compelled to spend 100% of their budget every single month and develop more of a use it or lose it mentality. So how does this affect you over time? Let's say you inflate your spending by just 10%. In this example, that means you're drawing an extra $1,000 a month or $12,000 a year. Not so bad in 1 year, but over 10 years, factoring no market gains, that's $120,000 gone from your portfolio and not working for future you. And if markets dip early, that extra withdrawal compounds the loss even further. Plus, even when the market does recover, your portfolio base is smaller. Let's look at another real-world example. We worked with a couple who previously bumped their spending from $7,000 to $10,000. Before coming to us, they didn't track the ongoing consequences until we met by year 3. And by then, well, it was a little bit too late. Suddenly, those market dips meant grief, not opportunity. They said, we thought spending more meant retirement was better, but it just increased our risk. And that mental pressure, they told me that before we met, they constantly worried about spending instead of just enjoying the retirement. In fact, they retired to reduce their stress, not add more of it to their life during retirement. It's clear that lifestyle inflation can create immediate problems and problems down the road, but the sequence of returns risk magnifies these spending dangers even more. So let's define what sequence of returns risk really is. It's the danger of withdrawing your money during a market downturn, especially at the start of your retirement. Put simply, it's the risk that you retire at the wrong time. If your strategy is set for a $10,000 a month distribution, downturns can force you to sell assets at depressed prices if you don't prepare for that accordingly. Here's why that's dangerous. Believe it or not, the order of gains and losses matters, especially when you start taking out money. If you retire at the wrong time, those early losses followed by withdrawals don't recover as easily as they did when you were in accumulation. And emotionally, reducing your withdrawals, even in those tough years, can be really challenging, especially when you just retire and you're finally going to accomplish some of these things that you had set out to do. So, how does that damage your portfolio? Well, let's look at this example. Imagine a 20% market loss in your first year while you're still planning to take out $120,000 annually based off of that $10,000 target. In that example, your portfolio drops far more than just a simple market adjustment, and you're shrinking your base by taking out money. Then, if you take out $10,000 the next year, you're only compounding on that problem if you're not planning for it. I've seen retirees hit these thresholds far too early because they're way too aggressive as soon as they retire, and they're at the mercy of the market and also what they want to spend. They face either expensive downsizing, part-time work, or a major lifestyle downgrade in retirement. And emotionally, to no surprise, that's brutal. Your confidence erodes, your stress increases, and what should be your golden years turns into your anxiety years. So now that you understand these critical planning elements, click the link in the description to book a call, and I'll analyze your specific situation to show you how to optimize your retirement plan. Now let's take a look at the harder to identify number, the psychological cost of all of this. Let me ask you a question. What happens when you attach your identity to a number? For many of us, you start measuring your self-worth by whether or not you can meet that certain saving goal, or in this case, that spending target. But here's why that's such a trap, because spending can become symbolic, not transactional. And for many people, you'll feel failure if your spending dips, even if you still have a safe margin. And comparison kicks in. If they're spending $10,000, why can't I? And here's how this negatively affects many retirees. They obsessively track in their spreadsheets monthly withdrawals instead of just enjoying their retirement. Even small deviations from their target spending can become stressors. They're glued to the headlines, and many end up taking more risk just to try to keep up, which is a dangerous game. I once had a new client come to me and tell me that they didn't feel rich, they felt broke, and they needed help. Sure, their problem was mainly a financial one, but it was just as much, if not more, an emotional one. Another person told me they spent their money to avoid feeling like a retirement failure. And look, that anxiety is very real. You don't want to have sleepless nights about spending during your retirement. In fact, the cost of planning properly is sometimes very hard to quantify, but one thing's for sure, setting yourself up for a retirement filled with worry and stress, well, that's not a lifestyle even worth retiring for, which is why it's so important to plan. And those psychological traps, don't get me wrong, they're significant, but the number one thing to plan for when it comes to expenses in retirement is healthcare. In fact, right behind taxes for most retirees is the concern of healthcare cost and the lack of clarity for many people of how to plan for them. And it's no surprise that healthcare costs vary. They don't fit neatly into those round number budgets. In fact, retired couples need somewhere between $184,000 and $383,000 to cover most medical costs, depending on their Medicare coverage, especially whenever that time comes. But planning for these expenses, along with potential long-term care costs, that is very crucial for many retirees. But too often, premiums, copays, long-term care, and coverage gaps get underestimated by retirees. But here's why it's critical not to underestimate it. Healthcare inflation is higher than general inflation, at least for now. And oftentimes, a static budget ignores these rising costs and healthcare emergencies. When budgets and reserves fail, retirees are forced to withdraw more, often at the worst time. So how should retirees address healthcare costs in retirement? First, I recommend creating a separate healthcare reserve for your emergencies and inflation, ideally covering several years of healthcare coverage. If you have one, you can use your HSA to pay for Medicare premiums when that time comes. Also, you'll want to budget for supplemental insurance and maybe even long-term care where it's appropriate. But I can't stress this enough. Stress test your plan for any of those sudden healthcare costs like unplanned hospital stays or surgeries. I know it's not fun, but healthcare expenses are inevitable in most people's retirements. And here's what happens when this is overlooked. I've seen some folks that had to pause or reduce their discretionary spending after an unplanned surgery. I've seen others sell assets at market lows just to cover medical costs. Not only can that erode your financial portfolio, but it can also erode your emotional well-being. And if healthcare catches you off guard, it can wipe out years of disciplined saving. So now that you understand these retirement-destroying traps, let's make sure you can implement a better strategy for your specific situation. First, you want to conduct a true expense inventory. Start by building out a full expense breakdown. So many retirees come to me with questions on their expenses, But we don't want to just rely on round numbers or ballpark estimates. Use somewhere between 6 to 12 months of your actual bank and credit card statements and break them down into 3 categories: your fixed expenses, your essential variable expenses, and lastly, your discretionary expenses. Then add a seasonal or one-time line for things like holidays and vacations or home repairs and new cars. Trust me, these are expenses you're going to want to plan for. You're not trying to limit your spending yet, but you're trying to see your reality without any type of bias, and you can't control what you don't see. Next, you'll want to run inflation adjustments by category. Most plans use a flat inflation rate, but inflation doesn't hit all spending equally. Somewhere between 3 to 3.5% for your core expenses, 5 to 6% for healthcare, and 2 to 3% for fixed housing costs, unless you're renting, which that might be higher. This will give you a far more realistic long-term projection of your real spending curve. By customizing inflation for each category, you're actually going to create a better cash flow projection for yourself later on, which will help prevent surprises 10 to 15 years from now, especially with healthcare. In fact, we even have a free software down below if you want to break this out and stress test your own plan. Next, you want to segment for spending flexibility. You can categorize your expenses into needs that you have to cover no matter what, your wants, which are comfortable but can be adjusted, and your ideal. And this is only going to be spent if markets are strong, like going on an extra vacation. Then you want to set spending guardrails. If your portfolio drops below a certain threshold, for example, 15%, you need to pause or reduce your ideal. Then you go to the wants, but never for your needs. We don't want to retire on a razor's edge. Having a system like this will give you automatic adaptability, and you're not guessing when it comes to what expenses to cut. The plan will tell you that. Next, you want to add in healthcare contingencies. In fact, to no surprise, healthcare shocks are one of the main derailers of most retirement plans, especially if you don't plan accordingly. This is why creating a dedicated healthcare reserve is so important. Now, this will vary. It could be somewhere between 3 to 5 years of projected premiums and out-of-pocket cost that is separate, keyword separate, from your regular spending plan. Now, this money should be kept in conservative buckets like cash, CDs, short-term bonds, money markets, because health emergencies rarely wait for the market to recover, and you need that money to be liquid. Now, for long-term care planning, if you're not traditionally insuring this risk, then model the cost scenarios of a few different things. For example, what happens if my spouse will need long-term care for 3 years? What does that do to your withdrawal rate if something like that would happen? And what would it look like even to use the equity in your home to cover for long-term care expenses? We bake in long-term care expenses to all of our clients' plans for a reason. If you're like me, your family's also been affected by it. And again, it's better to plan for it than be caught off guard by it. Next, you want to use dynamic withdrawal planning. Static withdrawal rates are a good rule of thumb, but they're outdated. In fact, they're inflexible plans, and they often force hard choices at the wrong time. I'd suggest implementing a dynamic system, and that can look like a few different things. First, you can use something like the Guide and Cleaner guardrails. This is where you can adjust spending when the portfolio crosses certain thresholds. You can use something like a bucket strategy. This can look like 1 to 3 years in cash, 3 to 7 years in bonds, for example, and the rest of your portfolio in long-term or equities. Now, this can help you insulate from a market downturn, and you can adjust those numbers that you have in cash and fixed income to support your risk tolerance and your desired level of spending. Going back to what we said about sequence of returns risk, this is why that's so important. Not having your entire portfolio susceptible to what the market does when you retire is why having cash or cash alternatives on hand to cover that spending is so important. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of systems out there, but you need to find a system that works for you and stick to it. Not having the right strategy is a slow burn to having your portfolio go down over time. And having the right one in place protects your financial security and your emotional peace, which is probably just as important. A lot of these systems will give you structure for adapting, and you don't want to guess what you can spend. You want the math to say yes or maybe not yet. So what does this really mean for your retirement? Let's tie it all together with what you can expect if you use an approach like this. Because your plan adapts, you can withdraw less in bad years, and that dramatically will extend how long that your money lasts. In fact, many simulations will show that guardrail-based systems often last 5 to 10 years longer than just a fixed withdrawal strategy. Also, it can give you lower stress and greater control. Instead of asking, can I afford this? You'll be asking yourself something like, which category is this in? And you'll know exactly how to adjust along the way. That's the difference between financial control and not budgeting out of fear and without spending structure. Also, for a lot of retirees, when you have a plan that's cohesive, you're going to have a stronger emotional satisfaction about where you're at in retirement. A lot of retirees who plan this way report greater peace of mind and higher fulfillment, not because they spend more, but because their plan aligns with their values and it's a plan that they can work with emotionally. And most importantly, they stop measuring success by just a number and start measuring it by a life that they actually enjoy living. And to no surprise, this also gives you more flexibility for later in life. When markets are strong, you'll have extra reserves and a clear understanding of where you can spend more, so you can travel, support family, take on new projects, all without financial stress. It's a different retirement when you're no longer constrained to a single spending figure, but instead you're empowered by a flexible system that will respond to your life, your health, and yes, the market. The result? You gain flexibility without guilt. And you'll reduce vulnerability to market shocks and lifestyle creep with a strategy that takes both of those into concern. And for many people, emotionally, you'll regain enjoyment and control over your retirement, so you're not as stressed as you were during your working years. And for many people, this gives them peace of mind to know that their spending is sustainable and that they're going to be okay. So now that you understand the dangers of the $10,000 a month retirement spending trap and how arbitrary spending targets can create both financial and psychological damage, you can develop a personalized retirement strategy based on your actual needs rather than just those round numbers. If you want help creating a personalized retirement plan that avoids these dangerous spending traps and ensures your financial security, click the link in the description to book a call, and I'll analyze your specific situation and show you the optimal way to plan for your dream retirement. Thanks for watching. I'm Kyle Kuyat, and I'll see you in the next video.